A warning before you listen.
What you are about to hear is not meant for children, nor for the faint of heart. This is an unfiltered retelling of ancient myths, told as they were born, raw, violent, unsoftened. Expect scenes of brutality, curses that linger, betrayals that reshape fate, and a hunger for power that shows no mercy. These myths were never meant to lull children to sleep. They were forged in blood, shadow, and fire. So ask yourself, are you ready to hear them as they were first told? Sources and references can be found in the episode description.
Zeus, the Last Born and the Revolt of Fate, an audio epic. Prologue. When the mountains breathed thunder. In the beginning, there was no salvation, only a crime, not a bloody one, but a silence shoved deep into the earth's mouth so she wouldn't scream. It was an age when infants were slain in their cradles, when names were swallowed before they were ever spoken, and thunder itself was shackled in caves, as if the sky feared what might happen if it ever roared freely. Zeus was not born. He was smuggled, torn from his mother's womb and buried alive in the belly of a mountain, as if the heavens themselves trembled at the sound of his first breath. No arms embraced him, no voice told him he was alive. All he had was a voiceless breast and air he couldn't tell apart, whether it was feeding him or choking him. This is the story we tell now, not as priests would preach it, not as temples would carve it, but as the stones would whisper it, stones that knew his name, long before any god dared to say it aloud. In this tale, Zeus is no god, no savior, not even a hero. He is a wound that grows teeth, a wall that drinks milk, only to rise one day and shatter. Here, you will not witness war, but what comes before it. You will not hear the thunder strike, but how it learns, for the first time, to breathe, and to convince its body, you will not hide any more. These pages will not glorify triumph. They will trace the shadow of a child who became a cave to shelter himself, a boy who never learned to speak, but learned how to silence the world until it feared him, a child who didn't know how to ask, because he understood, far too young, that those denied everything are the ones who take it all. Zeus, the lastborn, is not the story of a new era. It's the story of the end of hiding, the tale of a thunderbolt raised underground, not to chase away the night, but to invent a new night, a darkness no one could sleep through. And so we begin, not from light, but from the shadow that was already ancient when light was born, from a breath after which nothing else could be said, from the moment earth decided to give birth to a god, not to crown him with glory, but because he was the glory. This is the story of Zeus before he was divine, before he was feared, when he was just a scar waiting to split time open and make it scream. In this epic, we do not tell of a god descending from the sky. We tell how a cave, cold and wet and unmerciful, made a god from milk, from stone, from fear. We tell how Zeus was raised in the bowels of the earth, not to escape fate, but to become it. From his first gasp in darkness to his final crawl out of the womb, from a baby hidden like a sin, to the thunder that returned to expose every age that dared silence him. We tell of his silence, growing sharp inside walls. We tell of his eyes, how they learned to hate, of his skin, how it memorized the shape of vengeance. This is not the story of Zeus. This is the story of the thunder before it strikes, of the curse before it speaks, of a crime that raised its own executioner, This is the epic of the first uprising, when Earth spat out her son because he had become too powerful for her womb to contain. Chapter 1. From the epic, Zeus, the last born, and the revolt of fate. A cry in the womb's shadow. Night drank the breath of the earth, the way lips steal the last gasp from a slaughtered chest. The sky that evening didn't watch, it hid. And inside Rhea's womb, there was no life being cradled, only a crime being concealed. Something twisted beneath her skin, not quite a child, but not something else either. It curled in the sticky dark, a body pulsing with thunder, still learning how to spark the air, still rehearsing how to split flesh. And silence. That thunder was still warm, kicking violently against her insides every time she remembered how his siblings were devoured, one by one. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Each name cursed as if she were damning the gods who eat their own young. Every kick said one thing: I will not end as they did. In that moment, Rhea was no longer a mother. She was a woman, fighting for the thunder pulsing beneath her ribs. This wasn't birth. It was a blood rite, a voiceless scream, a fall from a forgotten star into the soaked basin of a cave. She bled as if the earth itself had to be drained until Zeus's body could float to the surface. Her trembling hands searched blindly for something nameless. Not to pull a child from her womb, but to drag thunder out of the dark. Zeus emerged, not crying, but silent, like a lit fuse. His eyes shut, yet the air around him trembled, as though a throne had just collapsed and no one had yet heard the crash. His skin didn't feel like a newborn's. It burned like a blade drawn across your eyelid. His fingers didn't grasp the air. They strangled it. She wrapped him not in swaddling cloth, but in a torn shawl, stolen from her forgotten prayers. It still smelled of unanswered pleas. She rose. Her bones screamed. Her blood ran down her thighs, thick and defiant, as if the crime hadn't finished bleeding yet. Her eyes stared into nothing, like a victim who finally realizes her rapist is her husband. She fled the palace, not like a queen, but like soaked fabric fleeing the rain. The corridors watched, but dared not speak. The ground opened beneath her steps, as if unsure it could believe this woman was about to give birth to the end of tyranny. The guards were drunk, their bodies numbed, unaware of the blood trickling between her legs. Cronus slept, smiling, waiting for his next meal, unaware he'd be swallowing a phantom wrapped in women's cloth. Rhea reached Crete, or rather began her descent toward it, toward the forgotten cave Gaia had hidden from all who dared to ask. Each footstep carved pain into the earth, like walking on blades. Each heartbeat whispered, "Faster, the blood does not wait." The wind did not caress her face, it lashed it. The rocks moaned beneath her, as if all of nature was preparing to bury a secret that would one day speak only in lightning. She entered the cave. No prayers, no tears, only a ragged breath tearing through the dust. She placed Zeus on a slab of cold stone. She did not kiss him. She did not sing. She whispered to the cave walls with a voice scraped raw. "Keep him, and if he ever returns to me, let it be with thunder no god can forgive." Then she knelt, dug her trembling fingers into the earth, and spoke to Gaia the way only widows speak to a sky where God is already dead. Take him, Braid your prophecy into his veins. Return him only when his name becomes a curse that keeps the gods from sleeping." She called to the women of the shadows, priestesses with no faces, but fingers that knew how to hide lightning from the gaze of tyrants. She handed the child to them as if offering a lover to a final kiss. "Don't tell him I'm his mother," she said. "Let him grow, like beasts do, without a breast to make them soft." She left the cave carrying a stone. Not a stone meant for the road, but one torn from a cavern littered with the skulls of the dead. She wrapped it in the same blood-soaked cloth, fed it a few drops of her milk, prepared him like a perfect newborn, one who doesn't cry, doesn't move, doesn't protest. Then she sealed it in the swaddle, dragged her body like a mourner escaping her own funeral, led not by the child's scream, but by the trail of blood and milk in her hands. She returned to the palace, embers burning in her chest, her face wrapped in silence, heavy enough to collapse a kingdom. The palace still shimmered in gold. And Cronus was waiting. She entered like a shadow, not a woman. Placed in his hands a bundle that didn't cry, didn't twitch, didn't breathe. He didn't look, he didn't question, he didn't doubt. He opened his mouth like a sacred beast and swallowed the stone just as he had swallowed the others, never knowing that this time silence was not surrender, but a trap, delayed, because the child, forgotten in the cave's shadow, was listening. And lightning, once buried in the dark, doesn't rise to illuminate, it rises to burn. And thus, Zeus was born, not as a cry, but as punishment, not as a child, but as the sin the sky must one day atone for. Chapter 2. From the epic, Zeus, the lastborn, and the revolt of fate. The cave of prophecy. The earth that raised a god. In a place unmapped by gods, unwritten in the songs of creation, Crete split open like a wound and swallowed a child. Not to shield him, but to raise him as punishment. The cave was not a door. It was a fracture in the memory of the universe. A hollow untouched by prayers, where no torch dared burn. When the wind entered, it came back blood-stained. When a foot stepped in, the earth gasped, like a throat slid open. Gaia had carved this place with her nails, not as a refuge, but as a snare for destiny. She etched it into the belly of the earth, as one carves a cursed name into flesh meant to carry shame. Rhea did not abandon her son. She surrendered him, the way a forbidden lover hands over her child to gods of the underworld. She placed his tender body on stone colder than her chest, and whispered not with love, but with trembling resolve, "If he returns, let it be with thunder in his hand, not tears in his eyes." Then came the priestesses, women of shadow. Not mothers, but vessels that nursed myths instead of children. They did not touch the infant. They circled him, like offerings circling a temple of vengeance. One whispered his name into the stones. Another brushed his brow with droplets of cursed wind. The third slid a tiny spear beneath his head and murmured, "Sleep, but never sleep." Then she came, Amalthea, not a goat, but a curse with a udder. Her steps made no sound, yet the mountain trembled with each one. Her horns cooled by the breath of rage, her eyes glowing with the fire of gods long dead. She approached Zeus without fear, without hesitation. She offered her breast, Not like a mother, but like a machine spilling prophecy into a mouth made of lightning. Her milk wasn't drunk. It was sculpted, warm like yearning, bitter like loss, burning like fire that refused to die. Each drop built a nerve. Each sip sharpened a blade in his chest. The child wasn't feeding. He was swallowing something indigestible, ancient wrath, a longing untouched by love, and a legacy Gaia wrote the day she realized. Mothers no longer protect. They prepare for slaughter. Then he screamed, not like a child, but like a thunderbolt ripped from the belly of silence. His cry split the stone. It woke the cave like fear wakes the heart of a killer just before execution. And then they descended. The Curetes, not men, shadows on 2 feet wrapped in armor, drums in hand, steel running beneath their skin. They didn't speak, they didn't smile, they didn't sleep. They came down like gods arrive when the cosmos has been wounded. Their clashing blades masked his cries. They danced like skulls over fire in the middle of a battlefield. Every wail from the child was met with a roar of bronze, every shiver answered by strikes that etched the rhythm of war into his bones. They weren't hiding him, they were drowning him in a melody only gods could hear, those gods who now sensed their end crawling from a crack in the mountain. And nature watched. The wind whispered in his ear the names of gods he would one day kill. Trees stretched their roots as if forging a shield beneath the earth for him. And the birds? They sang, not to lull him, but so he might memorize the hymns he would later crucify his enemies to. Zeus grew, not from exercise, but from fear. He smiled, not out of joy, but because he had learned this world doesn't breed tenderness. It addicts itself to steel. Every tear added another layer of lightning to his skin. Every night, his silence deepened. One night, when even the stones slept, when the last drop of milk dried, and the drums of the Curetes fell still, he rose. His body still thin, but burning with a light no eye could see. His eyes shone with a hunger that had no name. His lips sealed, yet the silence around him throbbed with the promise of something that would not resemble peace. Zeus stood for the first time, naked, save for the spark in his gaze and the blade growing inside his silence. He was no longer a child. He was a god taking his first steps. And the earth? She quieted herself just to listen. Here, in a cave forgotten by the sky, buried beneath mountains, stitched together by a mother's desperation into a trap for war. Here, Zeus was raised, and here the prophecy began to grow. Not like a rose, not like a tale, but like a bomb soaked in blood. In this cave, where fate was buried like sin, lightning began to bloom. Chapter 3. From the epic, Zeus, the last-born, and the revolt of fate. The child who made no sound. In a cave that had never tasted dawn, a cave beyond the reach of mother's prayers, where walls birthed no warmth and knew nothing of gentleness, a child was raised, but never allowed to be one. Zeus, a spark of thunder buried in the mud of betrayal, born from a scream that never finished. He didn't live as much as he waited, a bomb stored deep in the earth's flesh, growing inside a silence that didn't resemble peace, but the tightening of massacre inside the throat of fear. The priestesses never touched him. They did not raise him. They circled him, like blind women orbiting a monument they could not see. Their voices were fractured whispers. Their feet moved like steps across a sleeping minefield. No one called his name. No one touched his skin unless a ritual demanded it. Even the earth, which once held him close, now buried him deeper than it ever protected. Gaia, the elder who still spoke in gravel and roots, commanded the Curetes. No breath of his must be heard, and so, whenever he cried, they clashed their blades, steel against steel, forging a hymn of war to drown out his voice. But Zeus never really needed to cry. He wasn't taught silence. He was carved to be it. A coal that never dies, a voice not lost, just buried. A longing that never speaks, a storm waiting for a beginning. There was no Rhea, no embrace, no lullaby, no mother's eye to guard his tears. He was alone, surrounded by faceless women who served him night disguised as milk, who trained him not to feel, but to become stone that coughs lightning. Nature itself took his side. The wind bowed each time he exhaled. The rocks cracked around him, not in collapse but in recognition. The light that slipped in through the cave ceiling didn't warm him, it watched him. Everything around him understood. This was not a child. This was something else, something colder than childhood, more cunning than innocence. Zeus did not play. He built. He took wood, then broke it. He chewed the bones of trees, embedded pebbles as eyes in twisted heads, tied dry straw into wings, and planted teeth in their mouths. He wasn't making toys. He was crafting phantoms, miniature monsters, half-born gods. And at night, those creations moved. They didn't walk. They slithered. They made no sound, but they left traces. They changed places. They coiled around his sleeping body as if guarding him, or warning him. When he didn't like one, he cracked it open, placed a stone in its hollow belly, and buried it. But not just any stone, a piece of the wall itself. The same wall that had heard his first silence, the same wall that had watched the moment he first understood betrayal. He was training himself. Not in quiet, but in strategy. He didn't speak, didn't stare, didn't laugh, but he grew with terrifying purpose. Every cell in his body learned to hide intent, to store rage in muscle, to teach the heart to beat like a scorpion. One sting, that's all it takes. Even the cave began to fear him. The rocks no longer held together as they once did. Light entered, then quickly fled. The priestesses recited their rites from a distance now, because a child who makes no sound is not silent. He is harboring something, a storm of words waiting to strike as thunder. One night, with no moon in the sky, Zeus rose from his stillness. He opened one of his phantoms, planted inside it a memory, and buried it. His first grave, a tomb for his past. And from that burial, he returned as lightning, as if telling the earth, I understand now. Silence isn't surrender. It's a delayed declaration. From that moment on, no one knew whether he was still a boy or something else entirely. When he stared, you felt the cave recoil. The walls forgot their shape. The air flinched. And when he smiled, you forgot you were underground. You remembered, the sky is waiting for his next step. Because thunder, when it grows silent, isn't resting. It's becoming a weapon of fire. Chapter 4. From the Epic. Zeus, the Last-Born and the Revolt of Fate. The awakening of lightning beneath a child's skin. Before the dawn had dared declare itself, while caves still chewed the last of their darkness and the earth held her breath at the edge of silence, Zeus awoke. Alone. No cries outside, no footsteps nearby. Only a strange tremor, spilling from his limbs into the cave's chest like electricity suddenly remembering it was alive. He wasn't a child sleeping. He was a bomb trained to mimic peace. His tiny hand shook, not with cold, but with something stronger than warmth, stronger than milk, stronger even than the fragile body that tried to contain it. Each finger pulsed, a ringing like iron struck from within. A lightning bolt rehearsing, learning how to rise from bone. Because the storm within him was not born in the sky, but beneath his skin. He didn't understand it, but he felt the shift. The air was changing. The wind, once passing gently, now slowed near him, bowing, almost afraid. Amalthea, the she-goat who had nursed him from nature's breast, paused near him. She stared as a mother might stare at a child she suddenly no longer recognizes. She saw something in him, not yet created. And she bent down, not in devotion, but in warning. Even the walls fell silent. Even the birds came down from their nests, perching on his shoulders, unmoving. And from between the trees, a limping wolf emerged. It didn't growl, it didn't flee. It crept toward him, stood by his feet, as if it had found in him something it never found in a pack, a homeland fit for wounds. Zeus watched, as the world around him began to shift, but inside him something darker stirred, like venom creeping through a vein. It wasn't joy. It was raw sensation, like a wound still waiting to be opened. He didn't know who he was, but he knew he wasn't like them, not like the Kurites, not like the beasts, not even like the faint echoes of his mother, whispering to him in secret from afar. He was something unnamed, a collision of will and mystery, not God, not man, not monster, but a wild possibility of all three. He sat at the mouth of the cave and raised his eyes to the blue ceiling of the world, the sky he had dreamed for so long of ripping apart. He did not gaze at it like a hope, but like a target, and in his chest a voice whispered, "You will not touch the sky, you will tear it down." That night, when the cave slept, when the drums went quiet, when even breath itself lay still, Zeus stretched out his hand. And something unspeakable happened. His fingertips sparked, not with gentle light, but with a grin made of flame, like a smile, drawn with a blade. He didn't flinch. He wasn't surprised. He smiled, as one does when waking from a nightmare that never truly belonged to them, because he knew the lightning wasn't outside him. It wasn't from the sun, not from fire. It came from the milk, poisoned with defiance, from the war drums beaten beside his cradle, from a mother's kiss that wept as it blessed. The lightning had formed, not as power, but as awareness, a realization that this small, silent body had been written not to serve, not to bow, but to ignite, to destroy, to birth a world that would resemble no other. And in that moment, the air shuddered, as if it too had finally understood. The first strike of thunder was near. If you've made it this far, then you are truly a seeker of knowledge. Support this journey with a kind word, a simple like, or even a small subscription, for its impact is far greater than you think. Your voice is the one that keeps this saga alive. Chapter 5. From the epic Zeus, the Lastborn and the Revolt of Fate. The idea of tyranny, when stone trembled at a glance. He sat alone, barefoot at the cave's mouth, legs stretched over stone still warm with the ghosts of the unburied. The silence around him wasn't peace. It was the hush that precedes a scream, a breath held, waiting for something to be born from the eyes. The rock before him was not just a rock. It was a tombstone, one still waiting for a name. And Zeus wasn't merely looking at it, he was staring through it, into the bones of the earth itself. He wasn't a child lost in thought. He was a prophecy curled inside a small frame, ready to detonate. In his chest there was no milk, only embers, glowing and cooling in turns, asking in silence, "Why me? Why wasn't I swallowed with the others? Was I stronger? Or was I simply late to the slaughter?" These weren't questions for comfort, not even for answers. They were hammers, swinging against the first god burned into his memory. He didn't see Cronus as a father. He saw him as a pit, a void that devoured time and still wanted more. He didn't want to remember his face. He wanted to sever it from memory, from the neck. That's when Amalthea approached, silent, like someone walking across a minefield made of history. She sat beside him, stretched her neck as she did whenever danger crept near, and spoke with a voice that only those who fed on milk mixed with tears could hear. "I was there when your siblings were torn from their mother's breast. I was there when Demeter's scream was smothered, as they dragged her like a lamb into the hungry mouth." Zeus didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His face had become the mirror that reflected them all. She said, "They didn't die. They're still inside him, trapped in a time that refuses to digest them. Inside his belly they wait for one thing, someone born different. Someone who doesn't weep, but screams loud enough to shatter the scale itself." He asked, "Why didn't they fight?" She replied, "Because they didn't know anyone would come after them." He asked, "And me?" She said, "You don't belong to them, or to what came before. You belong only to yourself." The silence that followed wasn't the stillness of peace. It was the birth of a thought, the first spark of rebellion. Zeus was no longer searching for his past. He was hunting for his beginning, a place from which he could rise to a ceiling that had never been cracked before. Inside him, the vision formed. No fire, no thunder, just the image of falling, a god torn from his throne, not with prayer, but with the violence of a womb rupturing against time itself. That night, Zeus didn't sleep. He watched Amalthea rest, like a swing suspended between two ages, and he wondered, does she fear I'm the beginning or the end? Was she raising me to hide the danger or to become it? Then he turned to the wall and whispered without moving his lips, "I want the stone to see me, to tremble when it sees me, to know I've come to bring them all back." At the next dawn, the air was still, but every stone in the cave was staring at Zeus. They didn't know why, but they were afraid. Chapter 6. From the Epic, Zeus, the last born and the revolt of fate. The wound no mother spoke of. That night, the cold wasn't cold. It was something deeper. A chill that erased the body's memory but carved remembrance into the bones. Zeus lay stretched across a slab of stone that sweated silence. His eyes didn't focus on anything, yet everything around him was staring back, as if the earth knew that something would bloom tonight, and it wouldn't be a flower. There were no stars, no moon, not even shadows. But in his chest, something gleamed, not like lightning, not like light, but like the question that existed before language. And then the voices began. Not wind, not beasts, but pulses of sound, vibrating inside his blood like knives still twisting inside a body that won't die. "Who are you?" the earth whispered. "Why weren't you devoured like your siblings?" The cracks screamed. "Are you stronger or just late?" The stones wept. Then the pain came. Not pain of the flesh, but the kind that gives birth to meaning. The kind that doesn't come from a wound, but from milk stolen from a newborn's mouth, from a breast that bled its children into the maw of a monster, from a woman who never dared name her son for fear that the name might be called too soon. He didn't see her, but he saw her. Rhea. Not a body, a presence in his bloodstream, a cry stuck in the roots of his heart. He saw her, handing him over the way a mother hands her heart to death. He saw her, not saying goodbye, only sealing the cave shut as if sealing a tomb. He saw her in the silence, in the stone that was swallowed in his place, in the blood dried beneath his fingernails, in the tremor that seized his breath whenever the name Cronus echoed too near. Then the voice came, not from the world, but from within, the voice of a mother who never spoke, but whose every cell still moaned in mourning. "I loved him," it said. "Cronus wasn't a god. He was a chasm with eyes. I thought he would protect me, but he devoured me. Every birth became a funeral, every suckle a farewell." Zeus heard, but he didn't just hear. The blood in his veins ignited, as if a memory not his own had begun to rise inside him. "Why didn't you kill him?" the darkness asked. "Because tyrants aren't slain with blades," whispered the abyss. "They're undone by sight." Then came the visions again and again. Hestia torn away, Demeter suffocating, Hera crying in a silence no one could hear, Poseidon dragged from light, all of them swallowed by a single mouth, a hunger that wore the name Time, but trembled like a coward. And in the middle of that darkness, Zeus rose. From a sleep he had never slept, he breathed like thunder, learning how to scream. He said to himself, "I didn't survive by chance. I wasn't hidden to live. I was hidden to ignite something that cannot be extinguished." He stared at the cave wall with one eye open and said, "I will tear open the mouth that swallowed them. I will bring my brothers and sisters back, from the belly of time to the sky's embrace. But before that, tyranny must know me. The stone must tremble before I even speak." At the next dawn, no one was awake, except the wind, and it shivered, as if it knew that the god who had been hidden was now watching. And now he understood. Chapter 7. From the epic Zeus, the last-born, and the revolt of fate. The first step beyond the womb. That night, there was no light, no calling, not even the sound of birth, only a body splitting from the inside, as if the earth itself was trying to deliver a thunderbolt from a womb too tight to contain it. Zeus wasn't asleep. He was pulsing, with something heavy beneath his skin, like a stone learning how to walk. The air that once cradled him now choked, like the breath of a prisoner held too long in a shrinking cell. The cave, once a sacred beast that nurtured him, had become a tomb, its stones painted in false tenderness. No shadow resembled him. No echo answered him. No hand reached to his head without trembling. The three priestesses slept without farewell, their bodies curled in the dark, their faces consumed by shadow, as if the night had swallowed their names. And Amalthea, the goat who had never spoken, rose on shaking legs and walked toward the entrance, as if preparing the darkness to be torn. She didn't touch him. She simply looked, the way one gazes at the end of a prayer that was never answered. Then she whispered, without voice, "If you leave now, don't ever come back." Zeus stood, his shoulders bare, but his soul was armored in something no one could see. No one knew how many years had passed. 5, 10, a century with no clocks. But what stepped out of that cave was not a child, and not an old man. It was a curse, walking. He carried no weapon, no torch, only something deeper, a gaze carved from the raw meat of sorrow. He approached the cave's mouth, that place where no road begins, where no story ends, where lightning is born naked. Everything before him was fog, everything behind him, graves. The one who waited for him wasn't a mother, not a priestess, but something suspended between bone and prophecy. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. Who leaves never returns. Zeus didn't ask for a blessing, didn't look back, didn't touch anything. He simply stepped forward. His first step was light, but the earth shuddered, as if the womb itself had been pierced from within. Every tree bent, not in reverence, but in fear. Every stone cracked, not in welcome, but in warning. He stepped outside, and the outside wasn't a homeland, it was a test. There, by a rock abandoned by time, just beyond the cave's edge, he saw something shaped like a sickle. He didn't touch it, but he knew it was his. The trees didn't ask his name. The winds didn't rejoice. No prayers followed his footsteps. He walked, as if every piece of him was exile. But he knew this wasn't an escape from the cave. It was a detonation from the womb. He was no longer a hidden child, no longer a prophecy whispered by priestesses, no longer silence rocked to sleep with milk. He was now something unnameable, being born, from nothing, from forgetting, from a wound with no name, from a scream never screamed. And that first step, it wasn't the start of a journey. It was the true end of everything that came before, the end of shelter, the end of concealment, the end of the cave. And inside him, in a place untouched by any hand, a question burned. Who am I, if I am no longer hidden? And his body replied, I am the one who will burn the sky. Epilogue. From the epic, Zeus, the last-born and the revolt of fate, when lightning left the womb and never looked back. The sky wasn't watching. It was hiding. The earth didn't welcome him. It held its breath. Zeus stepped out, not as a survivor, but as a blade, once broken in time's hand, now forging its own edge. Everything in him whispered the same vow, I will not return. His first step was a wound in the belly of shelter. Everything soft inside him tore. Whatever was left of the child slid out of him like a tear down the wall of something cold and ancient. He emerged with no farewell, no blessing, no mother's shadow whispering his name. Barefoot, yet the earth trembled. The wind did not greet him. The trees did not bow. But all of nature recoiled, as if everything around him murmured, this is not a boy leaving. This is something returning from an old death. He didn't look back, didn't call for anyone, didn't search for meaning, because now he was the meaning. He had become the abyss on 2 feet, with eyes that remembered slaughter and hands that promised no mercy. From now on, they would no longer say, he is the son of Rhea. They would say, he is the thunder that slipped from fate's jaw, not to finish the story, but to swallow it whole. He was not yet a god, not yet a man. He was the space in between, where nothing is written, because he is the one who writes. He was the sword that had never been wielded, yet had already begun to cut. The boy whose name no one had ever dared speak, now destined to make the world shout it from beneath the rubble. And the moment his foot touched untouched soil, something inside him detonated. Not the fire of heaven, but the fire of long-held silence reaching his throat. And so ended the age of the cave, the age of milk without warmth, of prophecies cradled in the chest of a silent goat, of mothers who birthed lightning, only to hand it over to the dirt. The age of hiding was over. The age of walking, without a shadow, had begun. And in that dawn, a dawn no one dared call by name, the first line of the Book of Thunder was etched into the air. There was a god who walked out from the womb of the mountain, unarmed, faceless, but carrying everything needed to set the sky on fire. And he did not look back. This chapter of the epic has come to an end, but remember, what you've just heard is not a record of facts, but the echo of a myth, a story born from the imagination of the ancients, etched into the long memory of humankind. If this tale stirred something in you, if it opened a door to reflection or wonder, don't forget to support the channel and share the journey with those you love. And in the comments, tell us, which moment in this chapter struck you the most and why? We'll meet again in the next chapter of this audio odyssey through time. Until then, farewell.